This is based on a true story. In the bustling city of Lagos, a couple lived in one of the luxurious houses on Banana Island, an area known for being home to the city's elite. This was a place where common people were rarely seen, and everyone drove out each morning in expensive cars, often accompanied by security escorts. It was a heavily guarded neighborhood where people mostly kept to themselves. However, this particular couple, Mr. and Mrs. Tony, was well known in the area because of their friendly nature, an attitude that seemed rare among the residents of such an affluent community. They were loved by many for their kindness and willingness to go out of their way to welcome newcomers, always offering help and guidance. They became so popular that whenever anyone needed assistance, they were often directed to Mr. and Mrs. Tony. Their selflessness and humility, despite their wealth, were noticeable. Unlike most of their wealthy neighbors, they didn't have security guards or escorts. They lived simply and peacefully, avoiding the usual displays of wealth. Mr. Tony was a handsome, brown-skinned man in his mid-30s, tall, calm, and always smiling. His wife, Veronica, was a beautiful, dark-skinned woman in her late 20s, curvy, yet always dressed decently. Her radiant skin and long braids made her stand out, and her bright eyes were impossible to ignore. But there was something unusual about the couple. No one had ever seen any visitors at their home. They lived alone with their 3 children, and their 2 male servants, both from Togo, stayed in the beautiful BQ of their mansion. To everyone, the couple appeared perfect. However, Veronica had a growing concern about something odd in their intimate life. Mr. Tony always insisted that the lights be turned off before they were intimate. After much back and forth and hearing his explanation that he only felt comfortable in the dark, Veronica accepted it. But after 12 years of marriage, she felt it was time to understand why her husband insisted on this. One night, dressed in a beautiful, see-through nightgown that revealed her curves, Veronica decided to find out. As usual, when the time came for intimacy, Mr. Tony turned off the lights. But for the first time, Veronica insisted the lights stay on. To her shock, she discovered that, for the entire 12 years of their marriage, her husband had never made love to her properly. Instead, he had been using an improvised organ. She was devastated and took time to recover from the shock. As she slowly regained her composure, she asked, "How could you be so pretentious, so deceitful, Tony? How could you have lied to me all these years?" Tony turned to face the wall, knelt down, and pleaded for her forgiveness. But Veronica insisted on knowing why he had hidden this from her for so long. Then, something strange happened. Tony suddenly changed. His voice became unrecognizable, and his face twisted with anger. He raised his voice and snapped, "Maybe you should tell me how you came about having 3 children." At that moment, Veronica realized Tony knew about her infidelity. He knew the 3 children weren't his. Tony had been pretending all along, playing along with the lie that he was their father, while he knew full well that his wife had cheated on him. Veronica fell to her knees, sobbing, and confessed her infidelity. Knowing full well that his method of intimacy with his wife could not have resulted in pregnancy, Tony had sometimes tried to convince himself that Veronica's pregnancies were divine, like Mary's in the Bible, especially given how decent she always appeared. For years, Tony had suspected that Veronica was cheating on him with her superior at work but had never confronted her about it. Considering his own secret, he thought it best to stay silent. Veronica was a well-respected, decent woman, always neatly dressed and preaching modesty to young girls in the neighborhood. Her efforts had earned her the respect of her neighbors, who even saw her as a role model. But now that everything had come to light, Tony would soon discover that Veronica's 3 children were all fathered by different men. Each child had a different biological father. Through her tears, Veronica continued to confess. "Remember when you took me to see the doctor?" she began. After a few years of marriage without children, Veronica had grown worried and insisted on seeing a doctor. After much discussion, Tony had agreed to take her to a gynecologist, but only on the condition that the doctor wouldn't ask him to undergo any tests, making Veronica believe she was the one with reproductive issues. "Yes," Tony nodded, his face full of anger. "I remember," he whispered. Tony started recalling how well-mannered and professional the doctor had seemed on each visit. He couldn't believe that such a respectable man had been the one involved with his wife. With trembling hands, Veronica continued, "The doctor manipulated me, and I was ashamed. I wanted to confess to you, but then I discovered I was pregnant. Since we had been trying for children, I saw it as a blessing in disguise." Tony, heartbroken and helpless, sat against the glittering wall of their bedroom. He knew Veronica had cheated on him, but he never imagined the extent of her betrayal. He had only suspected that her superior at work was the father of the 3 children. But now, he realized the full depth of her deceit. The first child, Kelvin, was fathered by the doctor. Veronica continued to cry as she sat beside their beautifully carved bed, her hands gripping her head in shame. Growing more agitated, Tony stood up. "Tell me about the other 2 children, Vivian and Debbie. I need to know everything tonight." Veronica paused, her sobs slowing. She looked at Tony, her eyes filled with fear and regret. "Vivian, she's not yours either," Veronica sobbed, revealing that the second child was fathered by another man. Unable to contain his anger, Tony demanded, "Just tell me, who fathered her?" Veronica shook her head and cried harder, unable to find the strength to speak. Tony stood there, frustration and anger building. "You better tell me everything tonight, Veronica. I need to know." Tony stood there, arms folded, watching Veronica intently. His patience was wearing thin as he waited for the rest of her confession. All he could hear was her sobbing, a sound that irritated him more and more. "Vero. I'm still waiting," he said, his voice low but quivering with barely contained anger, as though he could tear the truth out of her. Veronica slowly lifted her head, avoiding his eyes. Her gaze, usually steady, was now filled with shame. Her eyes were swollen and red. She stammered, trying to form words, but Tony's patience snapped. He shouted, "Are you suddenly dumb and deaf? Can't you hear me? Speak up now. Speak before I do something I regret tonight." Startled by his voice, she jumped up and reached out to hold his hand, but he pulled back. "Don't touch me," he said coldly. "Speak with your mouth." Tears streamed down her face as she murmured, "I'm sorry. Please. I love you. I'm sorry for what I did it for us, for our marriage. You know how much we wanted children." "Children?" Tony shot back. "You slept with 3 different men to save our marriage. No, you did it for yourself." Veronica spoke softly. "I already told you. Dr. Donald took advantage of me. That's how I got pregnant the first time. It wasn't on purpose. I'm really sorry." Tony glared at her, unrelenting. "And the others? They also took advantage of you. 1, 2, 3. They all did." He scoffed. "Enough with the lies. Tell me who the fathers of those other 2 children are." Now. As the night went on, Tony's world continued to crumble under the weight of Veronica's secrets. And she still had more truths to reveal. Find out what happens in part 2. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed part 1, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Hit the notification bell so you'll be the first to know when part 2 and other exciting videos drop.
But if I lay down and I play dead and I stay dead, maybe you'll get sick of being the monster out of my head, under my bed, thinking something out of my nightmares. See me right there. But if I lay down and I play dead and I stay dead, then will you get bored of killing me?
Silhouettes of you are like a taunt. Never really know just what you want. With you I don't ever feel calm. I can feel the sweat inside my palms. Play with me like cats and a string. You don't understand the pain it brings. You don't ever wanna give me wings. You don't ever wanna set me free. You know I'm addicted to you, and it's twisted, you've been gifted with the evil voodoo. Got me coming back for more, even when I've been screwed. Dolls full of pins, pierce my heart straight through. I Got issues in my head, I like you in my bed, but you keep me on red. Oh, everything is like a test, I better not text or I'll come off desperate.
But if I lay down and I play